You are listening to an exclusive interview on Bass Musician Magazine. The interview starts now.
Hey everybody, this is Raul for Bass Musician Magazine, and today we have the great honor and pleasure of chatting with bassist and vocalist John Montalbano. John!
Pleasure. Thank you very much, Raul, for having me. I got to say, I'm extremely flattered that you would take the time out to interview a total moron like me. I'm not really a moron. You know, that's the thing is, I take what I do very seriously, but I don't take myself seriously at all. So
there you go.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Our pleasure, man. And for those of you that don't know John, he plays with band My World.
Absolutely.
But is also very busy with a whole lot of things. And we'll touch base on some of those so I don't get ahead of myself. But John, starting kind of from the beginning, how did you get started in bass? Tell us a little bit about your journey.
Well, when I was a little kid, my parents were not big music people. My father liked jazz. They listened to kind of radio stuff, but my mom would listen to classical music. And I just had this thing for the cello when I was a kid. Mm-hmm. I could pick it out basically in anything. Oh, that's a cello, Mom. That's a cello, you know? If we went over to a relative's house and they had a piano, I ran to that piano. I never had a lot of formal training as a kid, you know, because the school that I went to, it was like, you know, suburban school in Long Island, the Catholic school, they didn't have a music program. So I think it wasn't until, you know, they had like elementary music classes, but you know, again, it was music class for kids. There was a family down the block that it was like the Brady Bunch. You know, it was like a widow and a widower. They had probably about 8 to 10 kids. Their garage was like this playground because they had kids ranging from my age all the way probably into late teens and 20s. There was a cardboard box in the garage, and there was this bass neck. I didn't know what a bass was yet, but there was this neck of an instrument sticking out of a box. I'm like, wow, what's that? Can we play with that? Like, yeah, sure. You know, so it was his older brother's stuff. And it turns out it was a bass. And I didn't quite understand it just yet, but he's like, yeah, you can have it. It was like a little warp neck, you know, toy thing. But that hung around for a long time, you know, and I kind of did a little bit of playing around with it. And then I guess when I got to be about 10 or 12, you know, I discovered Queen. You know, I remember hearing Queen on the radio, and I was just blown away. I was probably going to be a guitar player because I was I have a lot of guitar gear because I'm a guitar tone junkie, you know, as well for a lot of recordings and stuff. But Brian May to me was like anything that I could see on TV with Queen. I was like, oh, wow, just that guitar sound was phenomenal. So I was about 13 years old, and I went to like a public pool party at like the local. It was like a local community center thing, and there was a band playing, and I saw a bass player. I was like, wow, that's kind of like what I have at home. And I see him like they were doing covers and stuff like that, but he took this bass solo, and I was like, wow, that is awesome. So I was very shy, but I went up to him and I said, you know, do you give lessons? He said, absolutely. And he gave me his phone number. So couple of months went by, and you know, I didn't follow through on it. You know, I didn't call him. But then there was a mutual friend of mine when I was a teenager. He said, you know, there's a guy that I know that teaches bass lessons. He's like, I know you were asking about it. You know, so he's like, well, I got his number for you. So he gives me the number. Turns out it was the same guy.
There you go. So
his name is Rich Passariello, and he is the one who introduced me to the Dixie Dregs, Stanley Clarke, Jocko, of course. For me, it was always the Dixie Dregs stuff because they had that guitar. You had Steve Morse and Andy West, and you know, Stanley Clarke, of course. So that's kind of like what put me on the road to the bass.
Taking classes, did you further pursue it with further studies, or how did you go about it?
Yeah, well, that was another interesting story because I was probably about 14 years old. In the local high school, there was these, you know, I got into like a lot of metal stuff, you know, Iron Maiden had come out. I was blown away by that too. So I started getting into a lot of very diverse, you know, a lot of different styles of music, plus Stanley Clarke. There was these 3 girls that were going to the local high school. I went to a different school, and they were doing this like doo-wop project. And I just pretty much started playing bass, maybe for a year. And they said, we're looking for a bass player to do this teenage doo-wop project. And meanwhile, I'm into like metal and, stuff like that. So I'm like, you know what? Okay. So I went down, and the guy who was producing, his name was Steve Tudanger. And Steve Tudanger there was a band called the Archies. They did a song, Sugar, 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 and he put this teenage doo-wop project together. And I started playing bass in that. And I really started to learn quite a bit about music, because at the time he was working with Cyndi Lauper. He was working with Ellie Greenwich from the Ronettes. She would come to rehearsals. And meanwhile, I'm like, 14 years old. So project didn't really progress too much. But he sat me down and he said, John, he's like, you need to pursue this. He's like, you have a great ear. He's like, you're just such a nice person. Yeah. But he's like, you've got a great ear. He's like, you know what? It was time for me to go to college. He's like, so myself and he said, Ellie and I will write you letters of recommendation to whatever school you want. He's like, you need to do this, So he actually came to my house and talked to my parents about going to music school. Now, at the time, of course, I was very involved in playing, but I was also a tinkerer. So I was also like electronics and stuff like that. So I was kind of torn between music school and engineering, So and not because of my parents, but I said, you know what? I went to school for engineering, but I made them a promise. I said, I'm going to go to school for engineering, but I'm going to study music with real teachers. So I sought out a college professor, at one of the local colleges, and I studied upright with him. So I really studied upright. I studied a lot of theory with him. It's like I learned to read with him. And so that was kind of like the formal education to a certain perspective. And then, because I always figured that from the electronic side, I could always get into designing electronics for music. Plus, technology wasn't as broad as it is now with music. You really needed to know what you're talking about as far as recording engineering is concerned. Mm-hmm. So I did take that route. Because I did the electronics, the engineering stuff, I met David Gage. So David Gage, he does David Gage string repair in New York City. At the time, I made a preamp, an upright bass preamp, because there wasn't much out there at the time. When I went to get one of my basses, my upright repaired, he was like, we have a whole bunch of these other preamps that no one can seem to fix. So there was a certain company that evidently had a faulty preamp. I figured out what was wrong with it. And so he's like, there are so many bass players on the scene that have this preamp, and they just, he's like, so he started referring me to all these bass players, to fix their preamp. So Rufus Reed, Michael Moore, Rufus and Michael, they were the two main ones, because when they said, how much do I owe you? I said, how about lessons? So I said, how about a lesson? So with Rufus Reed and Michael Moore, I started taking lessons from them. So as far as the education is concerned, I'm an advocate for getting the proper education in music. Part of me wishes that I kind of did do some of that, even more of it now, because I do a lot of TV and film stuff. So when it comes to scoring, I'm not right on the, it's not like, oh, here's something in my head. I'm like, okay, start writing. It's more like, now it's all MIDI, so it's more like putting writing stuff in MIDI on a staff. But I do write on a staff,
Mm-hmm.
But it would be nice to be able to just have that a little more second nature. So, but that's, as far as the education side, that's kind of like formal education. That's my extent of formal education.
There's no right or wrong way to go about it. You've got people that will go a formal route and trained with all these other people. And then you've had other folks that kind of school of hard knocks, that they hit the club scenes and they worked. And
Right.
And I think pretty much everybody is in a continuous state of still learning. And if the moment you stop learning, then you'll just fall, so behind and kind of into a rut. So no matter how you got to where you are, it's constantly ongoing. And even with electronics, I mean, back in the day, you could open up a little box or something and look at, resistors and capacitors and, rheostats and go, oh, I see what's going on here. And now you open up something and there's some tiny itty bitty chip in there that you're going, what the heck does this do? And
well, you can repair it because you don't even know what the bloody thing is, right?
It's crazy. And you used to find, you could kind of understand the pathways of things, and now with solid state, and I'm not against solid state because it's allowed things to get so much smaller. It has taken away weight constraints, probably fragility if you think of tubes being made of glass and things. And now you've got people making tube mimicking electronics and things. So, it's all a process. Moving along after with all of this, tell us about My World. When did that happen?
That started really early as well. Basically, myself and Chris Munger, the guitar player in the group, we were probably third year in college. We started playing together. We did quite a bit of stuff together, early on as well. Like, we were in other bands and we had heard of each other because he was a town over from me. I was a diehard Dixie Dregs fan, and someone always said, like, there's a guy that lives in New Hyde Park that, like, he's a Dregs fan too, and nobody seemed to know who the hell they were, but because everyone's, we're teenagers, so they're all, it's all the metal scene and stuff like that. So we had heard of each other all the time. And then when I was in college, I ended up getting into this band, and we got a spec deal from Virgin, and so during the time I was in college, so it was a little crazy, but it was kind of it fell by the wayside. Band members couldn't get along. Chris, the guitar player in My World, came out to see a show, of this band that I was in, and we started jamming together. We always did something called My World. We had various drummers over the years, so we were kind of originally I wasn't the singer. I never wanted to be a singer. It was just one of those things where we went through so many iterations of things, and it got to be a point where singers were just such a pain in the behind that I started doing it. Chris had started working in the mailroom at Comedy Central, TV station, and we would play. And all the people from Comedy Central used to come and see us play. We started playing the club scene in the city and stuff. It got to be a point where they were still fairly small. At the time, it was before a specific show hit for them. Yeah. We used to play their company outings. So they would have company parties and we would play it. Then the head of Comedy Central came to the mailroom one day and said, I was visiting at the time. He's like, I want you guys to check something out. So he's like, just take this home. They gave us a VHS tape and said, we need you to listen to this. See what you think. So we went home, we popped it, and sure enough, it was the pilot of South Park. So he was like, we're thinking about picking it up, but I don't know. We're thinking about it. So I'm looking at it, and it was this whole, like, I don't know if anyone remembers the episode, but it was a battle between Jesus Christ and Santa Claus. And I was like, I don't know about that. I mean, I'm a Catholic, I'm like, that's a little much. So I abstained. They ended up picking it up. And we got our first break in TV as My World doing the music for their website. So when South Park came out, they built a website because, Matt Trey, Les Claypool, obviously, he did the theme song for South Park. And, so they had their guys out in California, but we ended up doing all the music for their website. So from there, with My World, we got a really big, fan base in New York City. And Chris and I always did some kind of version of it. I guess it was about maybe 6-7 years ago. We started playing even more with it because we got very much into the TV and film world and a lot of other stuff too. So we started doing it again. And BMG entity, BMG Chrysalis at the time, they were, we had signed a contract as individuals, publishing deal as individuals for our TV and film stuff. They came to see us play, and they said, so what's your plans with the band? I don't know. We're kind of playing. We enjoy what we do. They said, well, we'd like to sign the band. And this is only about maybe 7 years ago, maybe. So they're our publisher, but they do a lot to help us out. It's been really great. We're on our third album with them. But we've played so many stages. We've played, everywhere from Woodstock to California to Germany to trying to think of really cool shows that we did. We did a lot.
Yeah.
But we've been pretty much all over the place for years. And it's kind of like a little bit of a newfound love with it as well, because, we weren't really pursuing the band situation as much. Over the last 6-7 years, it's kind of spiked even more so. And I really enjoy it because I'm kind of a goofball on stage, and, I get to do a little shredding and stuff like that. It's on the eclectic side. We have a number of different influences, basically from the Dixie Dregs stuff to Frank Zappa to like the Foo Fighters we pretty much can do whatever we want, and we put on a pretty darn good show. So
very cool. Well, and with rock, there is so much influence between kind of the varieties of it that it gets really hard to peg a lot of the rock shows anymore. They might, if you had to pick, you might fall within indie rock, or it could be progressive. It gets kind of into splitting hairs, but it certainly is rock. And with influences like Queen, I think the thing that caught my attention is I'm thinking to myself, these guys have to be classically trained. This is not 3-chord stuff. This is highly orchestrated. This is a level well beyond. And I think with bands like the Dixie Dregs, who, by the way, is on tour as we speak.
I know.
Yeah, I
in New York next month. So
we chatted with Andy just before they went on tour. So some great stuff there. It is an ongoing evolution. You hear stuff and it gets incorporated, and there's modifications with the sounds that you can make, which I suppose should lead me to ask a little bit about gear, because that does influence,
Absolutely.
what you're using. Tell us about your gear there, John.
Yeah, sure. I've kind of run the gamut of a lot of stuff over the years. I think like most bass players, and everyone's looking for that holy grail of sound. And I think we've all been through a lot of that. My bass rig that I've been using is from Tech 21. I always use their bass driver. I've been using their bass driver for a long time as a direct box, and as far as studio stuff is concerned, just from that aspect. But also, they were one of the first companies that really concentrated on a bass overdrive sound without losing the bottom end. We were kind of stuck playing with a guitar distortion pedal for a long time, and it just didn't really cut it. The only way to get that kind of overdrive was with like a tube amplifier, like an old, an Ampeg SVT, that kind of thing. And that came from the tubes. There was no getting away from that. So when the bass driver came out, and talking to Andrew, the designer of it, that was really what it was all about, is to get that tube type vibe, but in solid state and in a pedal. I've been using that for years before they came out with their amplifiers. I had been through many different amplifiers over those years, and then they started coming out with their bass amplifiers. When they came out with their portable system, they have the VT500. It's a 500 watt portable amplifier. It's very lightweight. It's got plenty of power, but it really gives you that tube vibe of richness. There's a lot of arguments as far as a pristine bass sound, no coloration, and a lot of amplifiers kind of pride themselves. Bass amplifier companies pride themselves on that. But I think I'm in a state where it's like I like that coloration. You know what I mean? I love the coloration of that. I love that tube kind of vibe. Even when you're doing something like a little more, maybe not rock stuff, singer-songwriter stuff, or soloing, using more hi-fi basses as opposed to classic rock type vibe. I can pretty much get it all with that, and a little bit of coloration from that SVT-ish type thing, to me, enhances it. It's not so much like a glassy, pristine bass note. You know what I mean? So basically, I've been using their amplifiers now for since they came out with them, and I'm using 2 cabinets, basically 2 1x12s. For a larger gig, I'll use a 4x10. Then some. It just depends, But actually, most stages now, even if you're playing a large stage and a music festival, you don't really need to bring much. I could just bring the head if I really wanted to, but I kind of like having some of that stage vibe. But that's been my rig. As far as basses are concerned, again, you kind of run through the gamut of things. I play a lot of different basses because over the years and the nature of kind of what I do, the band stuff is pretty much focused around my MTD basses. I've been using Michael Tobias design for over, I'd say about 20 years, and how I got started with them, I was playing another type of hi-fi style bass at the time. And I was interested in one of their import series, that particular company. And I wanted to get something a little more on the custom side. You'd always go into these stores and look on the wall and say, wow, let's check out some of these beautiful woods, and I don't think I can handle that. It's kind of expensive, but it was time for me to go for one of the holy grails. Mm-hmm. And I discovered, I always knew of Tobias basses earlier on. I'd never really played too many of them, and Mike had just come out. He had just started the MTD basses. So my first one was serial number 219. Yeah, I've had it for a long time. It's one of those things where when I first picked it up, the balance was there. The neck profile was there. It wasn't fatiguing. And the response, really the tonal response of it. When you dig in, you get a different sound. There's no, I would say, compression. It's like sometimes you dig into an instrument and you get almost like a compressed type vibe. This actually snaps on the high end, when you dig into it. I don't know. So that first bass really spoke to me, and I've used that bass on countless recordings. I mean, everything from my band stuff to, I worked with Chuck D from Public Enemy, his record label, for a while on most of any of the stuff I did with the hip hop guys, where it was Chuck D or Public Enemy. Mm-hmm. It was mostly that MTD or Hofner. But yeah, Mike I met, again, it was about 20 years ago, and my first gig with it was I had gotten a call, talk about diversity in music. Again, I was always kind of like a rock metal guy, but with a lot of big fusion roots, mm-hmm. Dixie Dregs, Stanley Clarke. So I had gotten another call to play on a TV show for a country band. So all right, country, Dixie Dregs, So I ended up playing with this country singer. We had done a couple of gigs together, and then there was a big country music place in New York City, and they liked us so much that, they asked us to be the house band. It was really a blast. I got the MTD bass the day before, and they said, we want you guys to back up somebody on the Maury Povich show. Like, okay. Literally, I got the bass the day before, and we have a rehearsal that next day. And I don't know if anyone's familiar with Hunter Hayes, but Hunter Hayes is a pretty big country star now. I think he was 5 years old back then. My very first gig on an MTD bass was with Hunter Hayes. But again, it's kind of corny, but anyway. Yeah. But you can see the diversity of the MTD basses. I've used that on so many recordings. And then my next real workhorse basses are my Hofners. Hofner has this persona of being the Paul McCartney bass, and it seems like that anybody that wants to emulate the Paul McCartney sound, that's what people reach for. I met the people at Hofner, again, probably about 10 years ago at one of the NAMM shows. And I looked at it, and I'd never played one before because there weren't, you don't really see too many in stores. They're not around that much. I was at their booth, and I started playing one of their, not the Paul McCartney basses, but the club basses, which is more has almost like a Les Paul body shape to it. Because I'm 6'2.5", I'm a pretty big guy, so it's with some like the little violin basses, which I love too. The club bass, I'm like, all right, it's feels a little bit bigger for me, like I'm not going to snap it in my hand. The fundamental notes on that Hofner are just absolutely phenomenal. There's very few overtones. Any of the overtones with it are within the body. They sit incredibly well in a mix with hip-hop, with singer-songwriter stuff. With the My World stuff, where it can be on the heavy side, so I'd probably splinter my Hofners if I bash that around like I do my MTVs.
Yeah.
The Hofners are another one of my real go-to basses. So they're my main go-to basses, and there's a number of instruments that I have in the arsenal too. Well, I spent a number of years, about 4 or 5 years, working with Carl Thompson. Carl Thompson, as many would know or maybe not know, he's the one who built Stanley Clarke's piccolo bass on the School Days album. He built basses for so many classic, incredible, bass players, historical musicians. Les Claypool. A lot of people know Les Claypool from Primus and his Carl Thompson basses. And that was an interesting story because I was just dating my wife. She's originally from Brooklyn. I'm up at the apartment, and her mom is there too. I was getting ready to do a gig. I look at the Yellow Pages at the time, looking for a music store to get a set of strings. I look in the Yellow Pages, and my wife lives at one specific. Her apartment was at a specific address, and I'm like, 2 numbers off from my wife's address, I see Carl Thompson guitars. I'm like, Carl Thompson guitars. So I'm like, I say to my wife, Carl Thompson? She's like, yeah. You know Carl Thompson? She says, yeah, well, so do you. I'm like, well, yeah, but I'm really confused. She's like, the guy that we talk to on the street all the time, we always stop and talk to him on the street. That's Carl Thompson. Really? So I've been talking to this guy on the street with my wife. She grew up next to him. They've been living there since for a long time. Mm-hmm. So our mother chimes in and she says, I think he makes violins or something. Yeah. He's a little shop around the block. Sure enough, the next day we go around the block and there's the guy we're talking on the street.
Yeah.
And sure enough, there's Carl Thompson basses on the wall. We hit it off, and Carl said, he's like, hey, well, I built a bass with my dad when I was about 15. We had with parts and stuff. So he said, well, if you want to come in and learn how to make basses, why don't you come in? So I basically helped out in Carl's shop for about 5 years on weekends. That's one of my other heart and soul basses, is a 6-string fretless Carl Thompson bass. It's a 36-inch scale. The sustain and the voicing on it is just absolutely incredible. It's hard for me to play too many other fretless basses. That, to me, is like I have a lot of fretted basses, but I think I only have about 3 fretless basses. What a truly amazing person he is. And just very, very intelligent. He's a musician. I would say he's almost a musician first, and it's because of his music nature that he decided to build a bass, because he wanted to build something better. But I learned a lot from him, not only building, but and understanding what it takes to build an instrument. That's one of the biggest things too. I had to make a choice in my life where, was I going to maybe pursue building instruments or play music? But the music stuff really started picking up at that time, drastically. And I really had to make a conscious choice. And so, Carl and I just saw him on the street about last week, actually. So we have a great relationship. He's an amazing person. But I did pursue music instead of building. It's just really, to me, it's invaluable, because just understanding what the manufacturers, the builders, the luthiers, the designers of amplifiers go through to bring to life the instruments that we play. And not only as a piece of art, but a tool, to turn art into a tool, that you can work with and really utilize. That's an art itself. I think that experience really gave me a lot of insight and appreciation for the instruments that I play. So a couple other instruments too. I mean, Ned Steinberger, I have one of his Radius basses. Actually, I have one of his prototypes, an NS prototype, because I worked with Ned Steinberger with David Gage years ago on the Realist pickup. Again, I'm more of an electronics guy, so I've had a long relationship with Ned as well. I have one of his Radius basses, which has, you know, EMG style pickups, and they've designed them, plus incredible piezo bridge. So it probably has the best piezo sound out of any electric that I've played. So that's another one of my go-tos. And then more on the vintage side, I've been using D'Angelico. They came out with a new line a few years ago. So they have their XL series, and it's kind of like a Les Paul type bass. A better, great feeling neck, nice, and doesn't feel very baseball batish, but it has that real classic rock crunch to it. You can really dial in some great stuff with it. And I got my Fenders too, but they're not my go-tos. If I'm on a recording thing, and you know, I've been to one particular recording a while ago where it was with a record label, and I speak to the A&R guy, and he's like, well, just bring whatever bass you feel comfortable with. So I brought 2 MTDs with me, probably about 15 years ago. I get to the session, and the singer, the artist, looks at me. I take the basses out. He's like, I hope you're not going to use that. Yeah. Don't you have a Fender or something? So I went home and I got my Fenders. So aesthetics, that's another thing with instruments too. You know, sometimes the visual, sometimes it depends on the artist you're playing with. If you're backing an artist, you know, sometimes they want something that's less utilitarian, maybe a little bit flashier. It sounds corny, but I think that does mean a lot too. It's like, besides, you know, your persona on stage, sometimes your instrument is kind of like helps to project that, to project the artist, to project the vibe on the stage.
You should mention strings. I see some DR strings in the background.
DR has been, again, I've been with DR for probably, I'm going to say almost 20 years. For years, I've been using some other strings, whatever I could get at the stores. A lot of strings would just go dead after 1 or 2 gigs, sometimes not even a gig. You know, you put a brand new set of strings on, do some practicing with it, you take it out of the case, and then all of a sudden it's like, where'd it go? It's different if it's flat wounds, but then when I discovered DR strings, that was the reputation. Wow, yeah, their strings don't die. They're very, you know, they're very resilient. I started using DRs for basically for that reason. And I think, you know, as far as cost, they're a little more expensive than other strings, but they are handmade strings. But I think you get a lot of life out of them, a lot more life than a lot of strings that are on the market. I'm sure there's tons of improvements in a lot of string companies and stuff over the years. Why change when something works? And they have a, you know, and the relationship with them. They're really amazing people. I've known them for a long time. You know, and they have a number of different, you know, typically what I've been, you know, the taper cores on my 6-string. Taper cores, you know, they, for people that might know or not know, they have fewer windings, or they taper the windings towards the bridge. It allows the string to kind of sit a little bit lower without, I mean, obviously you can adjust the saddles, but you can get, it kind of helps the to keep a low action on the lower string, on the lower strings. And to me, it gives a little bit of a different flexibility to it as well. Find that like the low Bs and on my 6 strings, the low Bs and low E, even has like a little bit more freedom to vibrate sometimes. So I've been using them on my 6s, you know, any 5 or 6s that I have. And then, you know, I discovered these DDT strings. Yeah. So basically they're for drop tuning. And that was a pretty funny thing a few months ago where I did a recording for a band that tunes down to low C. So they tune their E string down to low C. So instead of using a 6-string, you get it just a totally different sound. It's like you can use a 6-string and get down to the low B and maybe tune that down. Mm-hmm. But there's something about that E string tuned down to the low C. It's a different vibe than a 6. I tried using a 6 on it, and it just didn't cut the way it should have. You know, you don't get that resonance. You don't get that attack. Those are killer. Those are great. So it's like I've been doing a little on the heavier side, some projects. So, yeah, so I just discovered them not too long ago. But, you know, between the nickel wounds on some of the classic, more classic rock style basses, and they make a great flat wound string. So, yeah, but their DR has been my main go-to strings for a long time now.
Well, and I know people would love to stay on gear, but we should probably move on and talk a little bit about what the future holds for you and for My World. What do you have kind of in the works?
Well, we got a new album in the works for My World, you know, and we're kind of a little on the eclectic, side. So our first album was called All Shapes and Sizes. The last album was called Domination. We try to keep things really interesting with the albums. A lot of albums, people that come out with albums now, you know, it's mainly just a collection of songs. When we record an album, we kind of they're individual. They can be individual songs, but we have a lot of interludes in between, you know, so we try to make it more of like a listening experience. So it takes us a little bit longer to kind of formulate the album aside from the songs themselves. So we're looking forward to the third one this year. As far as, you know, we do a lot of TV and film work. Currently, we're working on, they rebooted there's a kids show called Wonderama. So right now, I guess it was around in the 70s or something like that, and they rebooted the show, but we're doing most of the music for that right now. So we got a couple shows on the Food Network right now, which is pretty amusing. So more symphonic stuff, which is great. And then we got a number of gigs coming up in this year. This year's going to be pretty busy for us. So we got some people behind us. So it looks like we're going to get on some of these music festivals and stuff. I mean, that's our passion. Our passion is performing too. And you never know what pops up. We always get a lot of recommendations through our publisher and everything. So yeah, you never know.
Very nice. And if I'm not mistaken, probably the best place for people to look if they want to know is myworldmusic.com.
Yep, that's our website. Yeah, our website is myworldmusic.com. We're on Facebook. I think that's My World Band is Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, all that's My World Band. You know, you can look me up on Facebook too. I'm on there as well. And it's an interesting ride.
I tell you. Well, John, we appreciate you taking time out of a busy schedule to chat with us and, you know, share your story and all kinds of great stuff. Folks, make sure you check out My World, and when you're watching TV shows on the Food Network, you'll go, hey, I know, I recognize that sound. And again, do come out and support live performances. So check out, that's one of the things that recently Victor Wooten had mentioned is back in the day, people used to buy records and get free TV. And nowadays, they'll pay for TV, but they want their music for free. And it's for musicians that have this love and passion for the arts. The best thing that we can do is continue to show up and support those live performances and purchase albums and make it so that this kind of thing can continue to exist and we can all enjoy it. So, folks, you've seen here John Montalbano coming to you via Skype directly on Bass Musician Magazine.
Thanks for bassing out with us here on BassMusicianMagazine.com.